So I just watched I think was it the fourth episode of Tales from the Territories. This one on Championship Wrestling, the original Championship Wrestling from Florida. It was entitled Bloodstains in the Everglades. And you could tell that this one was a little bit more, a little bit more serious. I mean, they did talk about some funny stories, ribs that were pulled and stuff. But they were a lot more serious, and they actually played off each other more so than I think last week's roundtable did. This table you had Gerald Briscoe, you had Steve Kerr, Okay, this roundtable, it wasn't as big as last week's, but it was decent. So with this one you had Gerald Briscoe, you had Steve Kern, and to WWE fans that's Skinner, or to longtime fans of the NWA, early WCW, the Fabulous Ones. You had Brian Blair, or B. Brian Blair, one half of the Killer Bees in WWE. You had Bob Roop, who is a former Olympic wrestler and veteran of combat. He was part of that. You had Kevin Sullivan as well. That was part of this roundtable. And like I said, and I think that was about it. But yeah, this was a little bit more serious than the last one, because they got down to the nitty gritty of their time in Championship Wrestling for Florida, and they talked about a lot of key elements, that happened there, in that territory. They said that Eddie Graham, was, basically Eddie Graham was, for most of his tenure that they knew him, and to a certain point, was a good guy. Not just, a good guy for his promotion, but a good guy all around, like helping the youth in the community and stuff like that. Anyway, they also said that he was very, very protective, of the business. Very protective of the business. Because people were, even then, basically coming around and talking and saying, oh, it's fake, it's not real. So what he would do is he would, I guess, bring some guys in to kind of change their minds. He'd get them stretched, and all of that. Basically guys that were going to, I think, get into the business because they felt, it's no big deal, it's not real. And Eddie Graham basically felt disrespected, so he would have Bob Roop, or the guy that helped train Hulk Hogan, Matsuda. He'd have him, stretch him and everything, to the point that there is one moment that they dramatized where a guy, and Steve Kern said he actually walked in on this. I think it was Steve Kern. It was Steve Kern. He said he had to almost look away, almost, I guess he could have described it like he had to almost throw up or something. But basically, Bob Roop was stretching this guy as a courtesy to Eddie Graham, because this guy, Eddie felt was disrespecting the business because he felt that it's all fake, it's not real. So he had Bob Roop basically stretched this guy to the point that his blood was coming out of his nose, blood was coming out of his eyes, and he just wanted out of there. He just wanted to escape, but Eddie would not let him leave. The doors were locked, padded lock, and the guy was trying to beg, say, God, no, I can't take this anymore, and then Eddie would just sock him, basically so he could get the message across to not just this guy that wanted to get into business, because they thought originally, oh, it's not that bad, but he wanted to get a message across to anybody else that this guy knew that doubted the realism of the sport, because he was very protective of it. Because as they've alluded to in the previous episodes, the more real and personal you can make things look, the more believable they will be. And Eddie Graham was that kind of a person, that kind of a promoter, that he wanted to, keep it as believable as possible. And there was one incident they did talk about, because Steve Kern touched upon this several times in the episode. He talked about his dad. And Steve and I think Gerald Briscoe and Bob Rube, I think a couple of them had to help correct Brian Blair on the history of his dad, of Steve Kern's dad's, stint in the war. Because his dad basically had served in World War II, had been shipped out for Vietnam War, so I can relate with Steve Kern on that. Having, your father being to Vietnam, although my dad volunteered out of high school. He's like, I'm going to do this. So that was on my dad, even though, and I'm proud of him for doing it, but it's like he did it on his own. But anyway, Steve Kern talks about this. Steve Kern's dad was a 2-time prisoner of war. Once in World War III, not World War III, but World War II. Oh God, just imagine what, us being in World War III. Hopefully that never happens. But anyway, he talks about his dad being a prisoner of war, POW, in World War II, and then being a prisoner in Vietnam, for 7 years. Basically from when, I'm assuming, Steve Kern was 14 till he was 21. That's when his dad was one of the first POWs on a flight home. When they were freed, he was on a first flight home, from Vietnam, from where he was kept captive. And then, like I said before that, he talked about how his dad was liberated by the Russians, in World War II after that whole thing ended there. Or at least came close to ending. So they touch upon Steve Kern's feud with Bob Rube, I think, and they talk about how real and personal it was, and they did this at a time where Eddie Graham was not in town. Eddie Graham was actually out of country in Australia, trying to buy up the, I guess you could say, the percentage, the ownership of territory that they had there in Australia. So anyway, they knew that, okay, Eddie's not here, Eddie Graham's not here, because they knew Eddie wouldn't go for this. So Steve Kern suggested, going in a direction that made it more personal and believable between him and Bob. And he even, in his thing, Steve went and okayed it went to try to get okay from his dad. His dad was cool with it. Didn't have no problem with it because that was in the past. And, basically he passed it on to Bob, and Bob was all for it. He was happy. And Bob started cutting a series of promos calling, Steve's dad a coward, for being a 2-time prisoner of war, comparing the fact that he too was a serviceman and an Olympian, but he was never, a 2-time prisoner of war, and that for Steve to look up to that kind of a guy is, basically is wrong, because, it makes Steve a coward just as, his dad's a coward, because, because basically Bob in character being the heel was like, look, Steve's dad's no hero, he's a coward because he got basically captured twice. And Steve basically described the fact that when they started doing this, he just ran from the locker room, busted the door down, ran towards the ring, bumped into the cameraman, made the cameraman shake a little bit, which they agreed was probably a good thing to do because you make you feel more organic, more unplanned. And he got in the ring and he started to beat down on Bob Roop, several times. And basically this angle got so much heat. This angle got so much heat that, even Eddie Graham, when he came back, acknowledged that, do you think you guys probably went a little too far with that or something? Which I guess he was okay with, after seeing the result, like the payout, and attendance and everything for people to see the matches between the two. But yeah, they just basically, went so far with this angle that every person that had served in the armed forces, the military, up to that point, past and currently, that would come and attend the events would come and attend in uniform. They would come and attend in uniform, And Bob Roop's girlfriend at the time, who was working as a waitress at one of the military bases, overheard a couple of guys there saying that they were going to throw a grenade or something like that into the living room, through the window of Bob's living room window. No, but okay, let me rewind here. All right, but basically Bob Rope's fiance or girlfriend, who was a waitress at the armory or the military base close by, overheard a couple of guys threatening to do harm to Bob in his home by basically maybe finding a grenade or something like that and throwing it through the window of his living room to kill him, if not destroy his house and stuff. And Bob recalls his girlfriend asking him, "What have you done? What did you do?" Only to relay what she had overheard from these guys. So, to go along with that, Bob recalls walking towards his car after having an event, I think in an armory or something like that. He remembers walking to his car, and he sees a guy, a military veteran, pull out a gun like this brandished gun right at him, almost right at his forehead. And Bob's like, look, he didn't know what to do, so he decided just to turn away, hoping that this military guy has enough dignity and honor to not, shoot him in the back. And this is all stemming from the fact that, they went, basically to a place with this angle that got so much heat on Bob that his life was in danger. And that is amazing to find out about. Now they did touch upon Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, and his time there. And they talked about the fact that, Hulk would be in attendance. He'd be this big burly guy in like the second or third row just getting into the action. And they found out that he was part of a band that would play at what's called the OC. Not the OC wrestling stable that we know now, but basically at this club. Or it's called the other side or something like that. So Gerald said he went there one night with I don't know if it was with who it was with, but he said that Joe Briscoe said he went there one night, and basically, they talked to Hulk and everything, because after they talked to a waitress there, they found, and she told them all about Hulk, about Terry. They talked to Hulk, set up a meeting with Eddie and everything, just, get, Hulk's foot in the door. And just as Hulk's talked about in his several interviews and biographies and stuff, they kind of repeated that here, a little differently, but repeatedly. Because what they said here is Hulk had a match, in front of everybody, the training match, if you will, with Matsuda. And that Matsuda basically, like Hulk has, repeated his, kind of relayed himself, broke his ankle, broke basically his ankle is what he did in two places or something like that. He broke his ankle, or at least popped it out of his socket, because apparently, when Hulk tried to get up, he couldn't put no pressure on it. So the Briscoes, Gerald and Jack, had to untie his shoe. He was only wearing tennis shoes, that being Hulk. And they saw that the swelling had gotten so bad that it was the size of a basketball, the swelling. So they knew that he couldn't walk, he couldn't put pressure on it. But what was impressive to them is that not even a few days later, or something like that, or a week or so later, Hulk's calling up saying, "Hey, when can I come back? When can I come back?" Because they can't believe that the guy doesn't, you think after a moment like that would quit. What impressed them is that he wanted to come back almost immediately to show he's not a quitter. And, they just were surprised by the fact that, like, when a few weeks afterwards he was back in the gym, working out. So, that really kind of told them that, this guy down the line is going to be something. And, yeah, I think we can all agree he was. He was definitely something. Even to this day, he is still something. That being Hulk Hogan. They did touch upon Kevin Sullivan's situation with the satanic group he had, which included Bob Rope under a different name, which is the Maya Singh or something like that. They touched upon Luna Vachon as a member and a few others, Mike Lewin. And it was basically very taboo. It was very taboo at that time, especially in Florida, because you wouldn't expect something like that in Florida. Anyway, Kevin Sullivan basically says, basically said that, he was a babyface at the time. He was trying to be a babyface, trying to be a good guy. And that what happened where that all changed was he was in a match. I think I don't know if it was against Briscoe or somebody, but the Florida title was on the line, and he ends up kicking the guy in the head, which I guess back then was kind of like a no-no. You're not supposed to like kick a guy when he's down, especially, where you can potentially give him a concussion or something. And it shocked, on commentary, Gordon Soley, and Mike Graham, who Mike Graham at the time was wrestling as well, and I guess trying to be friends with Sullivan or something. And Graham basically, according to Sullivan on commentary, he's like, I don't know who this guy is. Why would you do this? You're not the same. And then Sullivan just, takes the belt that he has and then that he just won and whacks Graham with it. And then over the preceding weeks afterwards, he started to adopt a more satanic look, and thus his group, his Army of Darkness, started to come about. Which I'm surprised they didn't touch upon the fact that one of his members, as that group was built outside of Luna and Bob Roop and Mike Lewin and all that. I'm surprised they didn't touch upon the fact that one of the other members was a woman, Nancy, if you will. But I guess out of respect, he didn't want to say anything. But still, yeah, woman was part of that group too, and a few others, I believe. But yeah, they touched upon that and everything, and how even outside of the ring, to kind of keep kayfabe, to kind of stay in character, they would wear the satanic robes, and dressed the way you would see them on television, even when they were out shopping, eating, going to the grocery store, stuff like that, which basically threw a lot of people off, because again, they didn't know whether or not this was a real cult group that Sullivan was creating, because what happened was this was all taking place at a time in this country where nobody knew religiously what to turn to, what was going on. It was basically a battle between God and Satan, if you will. At that time frame, which it still is today, and God's going to win out. Ultimately, we all know that. But anyway, this was at a time where that religious belief kind of thing was like, really just write down like whose side are you on, what do you believe, and all that. This, of course, would pretty much, I guess, lend the fact that if you're a Dungeons and Dragons fan, growing up at that time, why, if you were part of a Christian family, why you couldn't watch the cartoon or collect the toys or whatever, because of what that stood for and the reports that came out about it. But anyway, yeah, that's when this whole thing with Kevin Sullivan had started. So they touched upon a feud he had with Blackjack Mulligan, and sorry. Hold on. Well, like I said, they touch upon a feud he had with Mulligan, where they basically brawled throughout the arena and outside of the arena and into the street for almost about a half a mile, and the crowd was following them, and the police had to push the crowd back to, I guess, help give the illusion of the fact that the following week when they came back to the arena, when the opening match was happening at that time, a week later, out comes Mulligan and Sullivan still in the same wrestling gear as the week before, all covered with dirt and blood and everything, thus giving off the illusion that they had been fighting for a week, non-stop, all across Florida, all over the all over the pans of the Everglades, if you will. So that was an interesting story that they touched upon. Another one they touched upon, of course, and this is where things started to get a little bad for Eddie Graham, is when he started to dip back into alcoholism. Because apparently, and I don't know if this is ever touched upon in any documentary, he had been clean and sober for 13 years. And what happened was he and his son Mike and Steve and I think Blair, I believe, I'm not really sure, were riding on one of his boats, which was a $100,000 boat or something like that, motorboat. And they were riding as passengers in the back, and they were basically, drinking. They were drinking some beers, but one of the things they were doing is shooting off or popping some beers, if you will. They would, which is basically like you pop a hole in the bottom and you let it go down your throat, which people commonly do today when they want to get a quick, I guess you could say a quick buzz or something, or they basically just pop it in the middle and they just go, just take it from the side and zip it like that. That being the can. Anyway, Eddie Graham's like, hey, let me try that. And he tries it, and he doesn't just stop at one. He continues to do it again with another. And that kind of started to, I guess from what I understand by watching this, decline towards his downfall back into alcoholism. To the point that he would get so belligerent that he couldn't walk. Well, he couldn't walk. He wouldn't know what he's talking about. And it got to a point that, and this was what was crazy, because Eddie was a pilot too. He had a pilot's license. Eddie boarded up the plane along with his girlfriend and Steve Kern and Mike Graham. And he is not, it's basically, this is the equivalent of putting a drunk person behind a wheel. That they are incapable of driving. They're impaired and all that. Well, Eddie Graham was so impaired to the fact that it was a surprise that he could even fly the plane. Get it to lift off and everything. But what was crazy about the stunt is the fact that even back then, Disneyland and Disney World, both Disney parks, were doing the fireworks display at night to close out the park for the night and everything. And what was crazy about this is Eddie decides to fly towards Disney World, because that's the kind of a clear path to Tampa, right? Over Orlando. But he sees the fireworks display, looks back at Steve Kern and says, hey Steve, watch this, just like your old man in Vietnam. And he flies right towards the fireworks as they're going off, right towards Disney World as the fireworks are going off. And he's just curving around, just doing all this and all that. And through the dramatization, Mike Graham is trying to convince his dad, hey, don't do this, this is, Dad, you can't do this, and Eddie's not listening. Steve, he's holding on to his seat for dear life, thinking, oh, this is going to be it, this is it. But surprisingly, they got through it. They got through the fireworks situation, but they were flying all over the fireworks display while it was going off at Disney World. And you can only imagine those at that time that were in the park watching that display, that closing fireworks display. They're watching it, and all of a sudden they see this plane just going like this and this around it. And you gotta imagine what they're thinking at that time, going like, what the hell's going on up there? What is that? Anyway, they land in Tampa and everything. but they don't land, on the runway like they should. Instead, they take a sharp curve because Mike Graham has to point out, hey, there's another plane, basically like maybe a regular, let's say 747 or Southwest lane or whatever, coming towards them on the same path that they were landing. And Eddie Graham, again, being so intoxicated, is like, oh, don't worry, and it just gets, this way onto the grass. But basically, once they did stop finally, out came, out, they were greeted by an ambulance, police, and all that. And Eddie Graham was so intoxicated that when he stepped out, they didn't put like, because with these planes, you're supposed to have like a little, you're supposed to flip out another, it's like a two opening thing, right? Two door thing. It's like the top is your door and then the bottom's your stairs, right? They didn't even put any stairs down for Eddie, and he just fell right out of the plane onto the asphalt of the landway. And the police officers who were there, obviously they recognized him. Instead of arresting him, go up to him, asking him if he's okay and everything, and he's basically going like, oh, where am I? Oh, I was just in the ring with this guy and all that, and they're trying to tell him, oh, you're in Tampa now and everything, and he's like, how can I be in Tampa? I was in the ring with this. He's just so out of it, and I guess he's also, but he, obviously, I guess he's, even though he's out of it, he still has enough know-how of his bearings to be able to kind of pass off the fact that he just doesn't know where he is. Like he tripped and fell, and he's like, oh, where am I and everything. He's trying to, basically he's got enough sensibility to kind of get sympathy from these cops or something. But yeah, overall, besides that, the episode I thought was pretty good. They did touch upon a little rib that was pulled on B. Brian Blair his first week into the business, where he was put, well, basically Pat Patterson and his other significant other were driving alongside them, honking on the road to the next event, and Pat's significant other was pulled down his pants and mooned them. And basically Briscoe, who was driving the car with Blair, him and I don't know if it was Kern or somebody else, said, hey, get in the back of the trunk, we get it to a certain spot and everything, when they're in front of us, we're going to pop the trunk and you're going to moon them, which B. Brian Blair was cool with, not knowing that he was going to get pranked himself, because what happened instead is, he did what they asked him to, and basically they did everything as planned, but basically what happened was, instead of mooning Patterson and his significant other, B. Brian Blair, the moment that trunk popped open and he pulled down his pants and started mooning, he started mooning the customers at a restaurant. And what happened is that he was when he saw exactly who he was mooning, he got out of the trunk of the car, tripped a little bit because his pants were still, around his ankles, and they just, Patterson and Briscoe and all of them just left him there basically drove off and left him there for a bit. And Blair basically considers that one of his most embarrassing moments of his career. Yeah. But again, it was his first week, so, it's kind of an induction, if you will, into wrestling. You got to be ribbed, once in a while to kind of get you to see whether or not you'll stay with this business, and be able to deal with all the pranks and everything that will come your way. But again, overall, I thought the episode was good. I thought it was, again, it was definitely a lot darker and taken a lot more serious than the last one. And I appreciate that, and again, like I said, I appreciate the fact that they bounced off each other. Like they would start one story, and then the other would say, okay, this is why I'm coming in, and all that. No interruptions and all that. So I liked it. I liked it was a little bit more organized. And next week we have STW, which I think is Stampede Wrestling, or at least the early portion of Stampede Wrestling, and they're going to have Bret Hart. They're going to have Abdullah the Butcher. We're gonna have Bobby Bass. I think is that Rob Bass? I think no, I don't know. Bobby Bass is gonna be there, and I think somebody else is there as well. And we'll see exactly what that one's gonna be about, and everything. But so far, so good with this series. So far, so good. I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I can't wait to see what the next one is going to be like. What stories we're going to get out of that with the STW. So, yeah. Again, as I've said before, guys, I highly recommend you check out Tales from the Territories. I think you'll truly enjoy what you see. And let me know what your thoughts are down below. Comment if you like. Live chat during the premiere. Super chat, super stickers are open during the live chat. Super thanks afterwards. You can also support me at Venmo at Brian-Warmer-2 and at Cash App at BWRoses98. And guys, honestly, right now, because of the unknownness of this whole rebate stimulus here in California, I could really use the help financially. If you could do that through Venmo and Cash App, be really greatly appreciated. Also, you can find me at patreon.com. That's BW Roses, the $1, $3 tier. You can also find me at BW Roses Discussions, all your favorite audio podcast platforms except for Pandora. Also, you can find me at VENMO at BW Roses for content you can't get anywhere else. At deviantart.com, that's BVW1979. And you can also find me at my Teespring store for merchandise you can't get anywhere else, just in time for the holidays. But guys, let me know what your thoughts are overall. Again, I suggest checking it out. Like I said, I thought this was a good episode. A lot more taken a lot more serious than the last one, and cannot wait to see the one with Bret Hart and Abdullah next week and see what stories we get out of that. So until then, guys, I will talk to y'all later.